Well, welcome everyone. We are so glad that you could come and join us today. My name is Jill Peterson, and I am a pastor on staff at the Duluth Vineyard. And I am here today with two amazing women, Jeannie Bourne and Cheri Frame. And they're going to introduce themselves. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, how many kids you have, why you came to love homeschooling? Jeannie, would you start us?
Sure, I'd love to, yeah. So I have two daughters. Hope is a homeschool graduate from 2 years ago. She's now in a School of Biblical Studies, distancing herself online, yes, just clarify. And Ruby is 14 in ninth grade. Yeah, she loves interior designing. She's redesigning her house one room at a time. I'm loving that. And she's actually studying for her first exam, one of Cheri's actually, to earn college credit. So she's hard at work with that. What brought me to homeschooling is a good question. I felt like God was just tugging on my heart to ask the question, what do you have for my kids? So I began to ask that question, and when Hope was about ready to enter fourth grade, I felt him telling me to bring her home. I was terrified. I was like, no, yeah, I got nothing. Feeling hugely inadequate. I had been in the workforce. That was my identity, which of course got stripped away very quickly when I chose this. And so it took me a lot of time to just prepare my heart and to say yes. And so once I said yes, it wasn't a piece of cake at the beginning. Hope and I, our personalities are very different. It was a challenge, but I just kept hearing him say, stick with this. This is what needs to happen. And so I did. And short story, basically, I really feel like that decision was one of the better decisions I've made. And I think my relationship with my daughters, outside of the academic stuff, which, you need lots of wisdom for that, I feel like, but our relationship is so much better. Like, I just really felt like that was part of the big picture in bringing Hope home and then continuing with Ruby. So it's an every year thing. What do you got, God? What do you want to do? And I feel like he just keeps saying, until I give a red light, stay the course. So that's my story.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Cheri, tell us a little bit about you, why you love homeschooling, about your kids. Tell us something about you too.
Sure. Well, thanks for the opportunity. This is just a great season for all parents. It's a challenging one, but I think that we can rise through this together. So I appreciate the opportunity to be a resource for families in Duluth. I live just north of the Minneapolis area, so we've been in Minnesota our whole life. My husband's a public school teacher. He teaches math, and we chose to homeschool from the very beginning simply because I didn't want to put my kid on the school bus. It was for that reason. And like Jeannie, 1 year at a time, not knowing what we were really doing, but just always asking God, what did he have for us that year? And so 1 year led to the next and the next. We have 3 kids that are within a 4-year span. So juggling that multi-age can be challenging, but we just take it 1 year at a time. I'm now on the other side of it. 3 of my kiddos have graduated, and we did homeschool all the way through kindergarten, all the way through high school. And in fact, we dabbled into the programs that Minnesota has available for doing college, early college. And through that process, my kids graduated college early. And I share that with you because from that experience, what I learned is a little bit of knowledge goes a long way. So I have been working with families trying to share that knowledge actually for the last 15 years. And so that's what I still do for families, do educational consulting for families with my company that I started, just so that we can encourage and equip families and students to continue on this journey of education in a way that they can do so affordably. So I still do that, even though my 3 kids have graduated and have launched.
That's awesome. Well, we all kind of find ourselves in this very weird situation. Maybe some families are tuning in and they have children at home and they've been homeschooling, and we think that that's awesome. There are lots of families that right now, because of the COVID-19 quarantine and the stay-at-home order, that they're navigating this brand new pathway of trying to figure out exactly what and how to guide their child's education when they've got a teacher at school who is giving really amazing guidance on how to move forward with that education. I know that it can feel so overwhelming. In fact, I have a little kindergartner at home as well, and I felt that pressure as well of just trying to figure out what lessons she has to do today, how to get on the Google Classroom sites, how to, access the amazing information of her teachers. And, I thought it was so interesting in both of your responses that, both of you started this, not knowing exactly what it looked like for you and for your family to embark on this, guiding your students through, your kids through being a student. And so, I really want to talk about just quickly, like, what is the difference between distance learning or public school learning at home and homeschooling? Because I really do think that they are two different things. What are your thoughts on that?
Go ahead, Cheri.
Well, Jill, it's actually a legal distinction. There are Minnesota statutes that are very clear in what the expectations and requirements are. And I just think it's good for parents to recognize that they're not being asked and forced into this realm of homeschooling. They do have still the full support of the public school and the teacher behind them. So public schooling or distance learning still involves the public school as being the person or the entity that's going to choose the curriculum and provide the lesson plans through that teacher and provide the support to that student and the grading and all of that comes with public school education. Homeschool, on the other hand, in Minnesota, that is almost a different entity. In fact, it is. The parent is now responsible for choosing curriculums, for facilitating that learning of the student. So whether that's directly teaching or engaging in outside resources for lesson plans or teaching, it is up to the parent to drive that student's education. So I think that they are really two distinct means of educating our students, and we need to be clear of what we're asking of parents who are distance learners now. And we're really not asking them to dive into homeschooling unless they choose to. We're asking them to partner with the public school in a different way, to be their students' helper while they're at home.
That's really good. I think that distinction is really important. And I also want to say, if you're a teacher tuning in, we see that you are trying to care for your students. I've been blown away by my child's school's response, by the response of my friends who are teachers, the resources that are out there. We know that you love your students, and we are so appreciative that other people, other humans, would invest in our kids in such a massive way. One of the ways that I think you both are so equipped to really help parents in this chunk of time is really by talking through just some of the questions that people have wrote into us asking about how to manage schooling at home with your own children. That's a very different thing than the normal routine for a lot of families. And so as parents are attempting distance learning, what advice would you give them about having multiple ages under the same roof and trying to do maybe those different levels of learning and accomplish that during a day? How do we even begin to approach that?
Cheri, I'm going to throw that over to you because mine were 6 years apart, so that was a little easier for me to manage. I was able to give Hope independent learning while I worked with Ruby, kind of worked it that way. So I think you have a lot more knowledge in this, so I'm going to give it to you.
Sure, happy to take that one. First and foremost, we want parents to be parents. And secondary is education. So as a parent, we want to make sure that we're creating an environment and just to bring the stress level down. Our kids have been switched from an environment that they probably really enjoy to being at home, and that's new and unusual for them as well. So some of the things that we can do is, first of all, just pay attention to the environment and give ourselves some grace and give our students some grace and really lower the expectations. We're not trying to do public school in its entirety at home.
Right.
We're trying to do this in a loving, caring manner, understanding that our teachers are doing the absolute best. But they were sort of thrown into this situation 2 weeks ago, and so they're new at it as well. There's going to be hiccups along the journey. That's just a given. So if we can empower our students really to take ownership of their education and come alongside of them and let them know that we are here to support them. And we're going to help figure it out as we go as well.
That's great. I think that that's so important. You know, Jeannie, we were speaking the other day, and you were talking a little bit about mental health of kids right now and how we can begin to support maybe the most important thing of this season for them, their mental health, their outlook, their optimism. Can you speak to that a little bit for us? How do we begin to do that?
Yeah, I think it's just learning, like I call it a toolbox, like as families or kids to kind of just find ways right now to cope in a healthy way with the stresses and anxiety as it comes up. For little younger kids, I think, you know, I have the early childhood education background. So like even imaginative play, role playing, it's super helpful for little ones to kind of express emotions that way. And then what works for the family, like just put it into that daily rhythm, because for some of us there's going to be days where we're just loving on our kids because it's a tough day. Emotionally they're falling apart, emotionally you're falling apart. It's okay. They're going to be okay, you're going to be okay. And to take that time to just really focus on maybe what they're feeling, what's going on, and find different ways to help them cope, you know? Pray for them, obviously, play worship music, anything that they can come up with that's going to just help them navigate those feelings and emotions in a healthy way. That's what I would suggest. Yeah.
I think that's super important. I mean, I had that day yesterday. I have 2 little girls at home, 2 of them both so emotional.
Yeah.
So I just felt worn through by the end of the day. And I thought, you know what? If all of the flashcards don't get cut out today, then they don't get cut out today.
That's right. Yep.
And I can imagine how this works out even with, you know, middle school students or high school students.
That's right.
Possibly high school students who are missing pretty big, you know, academic and, you know, sports related things right now. Even social things that they have been waiting for. I really do sympathize with that loss that must exist. And so I think that's really important to hear both of you just say, like, you know, being a parent is what we're doing. That's what we can show up and do.
Well, that's what the kids need most now. And I think even having the conversation about like disappointment is huge. It is on the daily that all of us are dealing with something that's not going to be happening. Something, you know, and this is the first time for all of us, letting your kids know, like, I've never been through this either. We're doing this together and figuring it out together. So there isn't this, mom and dad got it figured out, I don't know what to do. And that's at any age level. Just realizing that, you know what? So we have to have that grace. And there's grief too, you know, like those conversations about how do we deal with those things? Don't just push them aside. This is a really good opportunity to have those conversations going on about the disappointment, the grief, the loss, the things that, you know, you're not, like seniors, you know, not having their ceremonies, things like that. Have the conversations. Their well-being right now is most important. as the parent dealing with those things for sure.
I think that's really good. You know, Cheri, if you could even talk a little bit, like, you know, if you're helping your student, that's really what I'm going to call it from here on out, right? Like, we're not teachers, we're not educators, we are parents. So if we're helping our child with distance learning, what are some tricks that you might have for a rowdy 2-year-old, or for a child who's not able or not at the point where they're ready to, you know, experience schooling, to help parents spend that specific time with the child who needs their assistance or their help? How do you manage that?
I think it's important to understand that our younger students recognize, or even our preschoolers are recognizing that something is different. They're perhaps used to having mom to themselves for the day because these other students are gone. And it's more flexible when it's just you and the little one. You can pick up and go to the park and you know, do things that maybe they don't have the language yet to understand what social distancing actually means. And so they're just wondering why they can't have the typical play day as well. So I think it's just important to recognize that everybody might be going through a withdrawal or grieving process, but they're expressing it differently. So perhaps there can be spots in each room, milk crates with a new toy, with new books in them, that perhaps get rotated so it looks a little bit fresh and new, to break a little bit of the routine. And then this is really going to be a fun opportunity for those students who typically spend their day apart, at brother and sister, to perhaps come together and to enjoy time together. Games and puzzles are just a wonderful learning opportunity, not only for the older student to have the opportunity to use games and puzzles as critical thinking, or another means of learning that they don't do in a typical large classroom setting, but a way to interact and share and perhaps find new methods of communication with someone who is 2 years old that they haven't really had to. And maybe they're going to do projects together that, again, they only have time to do on a Saturday in the busyness of the family season. But now they get time to bake cookies together. Maybe it's a time for the 7th grader to come down to that preschooler's level and color together. So there can be a lot of opportunity for building relationships here. We just, I think, have to acknowledge that everybody's method of dealing with this is going to look a little bit.
For sure. So, you know, as you guys have, you know, homeschooled your children successfully and are currently still homeschooling, Jeannie, in your case, what are some struggles that you faced? Things that you felt pressure maybe to achieve in a day? What does a normal, you know, hour-wise time or routine look like for a normal homeschool family?
Yeah. Well, and I'll have to say too, I read something the other day that was helpful even for me now is, you know, like the whole idea of, you know, giving families schedules. Like, to me, that makes me feel less control, because at 10 o'clock I'm doing this, and so like we have a routine. So routine to me is more like, these are the expectations of today. They don't have to happen in this certain order. Ruby's 14. She manages her day, right? And so she knows what needs to be done, and realizing that, of course, when you're home and there isn't distractions and crowd control and switching and going to the bathroom and changing to go eat lunch, your time is shortened. So if you're in a public school setting and you have 6 hours a day, she's not in school 6 hours a day. And so for parents to understand that that time will shorten, and it should shorten, because, you know, unless they're managing, like the routine is different where you're working with a little one, and then, you know, or it may have to be done in the afternoon. Having to be flexible is key right now, for sure. So the struggles I've faced have been more personal on my level of like, can I do this? Am I adequate enough? Do I have what it takes? And so those struggles I've wrestled with between me and God. Where's my identity? What voices am I listening to? I don't hardly ever listen to podcasts, read books, or anything on parenting or homeschooling because I feel like my greatest resource is Jesus. And he's going to lead and guide me. He's my helper, right? And he's going to lead and guide me as I make those decisions. And so back to the question of a normal school day, we'll wake up. Sometimes there's worship. We pray. What are you grateful for? Like now there's been more needs. So we're helping out in different ways. Like, you know, what Cheri was saying too with like siblings, I think the empathy aspect of this is such a good opportunity right now for all of us to know that we're dealing with a lot of the same emotions, the same sort of things. And so, you know, my sister's a director of nursing at an assisted living, and Ruby wrote 61 cards. We dropped them off at the door. That to me is like, there's so much value in that type of education. So just as I follow Jesus in the kingdom of God, I have to be interruptible. That's how I see homeschooling with my kids. I have to be able to go, this is an opportunity that God is providing. I'm taking it. And so the flexibility aspect has been a struggle too, because I'm very much like, I mean, I come from the administrative background, like this got to be done, this, you know, check. And so that's been a shift. There's a mindset and a preparedness that comes with homeschooling that families that have been thrust into distant learning haven't had that. And so I've had time to sit and look at, how does Ruby learn? What are her interests, right? Like, how is she going to learn best? And so her day is like 3 hours a day. She can be done in 2 hours sometimes. She's the kind of kid, she likes to get it done and move on with her day. My oldest wasn't like that. She very much needed the motivation and to really press and say, this is yours. You have to gain ownership to this. I can't do that for you. And so sure, there's been a lot of struggles, but as I've learned to lean into Jesus and trust him, he has been incredibly faithful. So yeah.
I think that's a really interesting word, that ownership piece. You know, one of the questions that someone sent us was, how do we motivate a student who maybe is unwilling at this point to engage in any school or distance learning, public school at home, doesn't matter what it's called. How do we engage a child who is actively resisting that schoolwork? So Cheri, how have you seen this done before? What are some techniques or tricks that you might have to beginning to help motivate a child who is obviously either emotionally or mentally not ready to take on that challenge?
When I'm presented with a challenge, you know, I'm working with a family and has a student that is being challenging. Try to work with the parent and identify if this is an academic challenge or a character challenge. And we can't teach character through academics. And, you know, insisting that your student do a math lesson that they don't want to do, those doesn't flow into character. We need to teach and develop character, and then it will flow into academics. So I would encourage parents to stop insisting that a math lesson, for example, get done. Your student still has a public school teacher who that they are accountable to within that system. So take a step back and understand why your student is resisting, and use it as an opportunity to build up that relationship and look at it from a character standpoint instead. If your student is resisting, why are they resisting? Is it out of fear and anxiety? Is it out of willfulness? Is it because they don't like to be managed? There can be a lot of positive things that come out of this by a parent starting to just interpret a little bit more why their student is giving them a resistant attitude, and use it as an opportunity to open that dialogue. Sometimes we do need to step in and parent, but sometimes we just need to step back and listen as well.
I think that's great advice. That's huge advice, especially as, you know, it's not like we know our children away from us. You know, sometimes our kids give the very best that they can give, away from family structure. That's a very normal developmental idea. And I think that sometimes that can happen, and realizing that sometimes your child just isn't capable of giving the best because they're human little beings. And I think that's really, really helpful to make that distinction between parent and, you know, kind of a counselor of sorts, not a professional counselor by any means, but a person who can offer wise counsel and listen really well. So what are some resources that you've pulled together over the years, both of you, to create an atmosphere of learning? Whether that be in the way that you ask questions, the curiosity, or even the functionality of your homes. What does that look like?
Well, I guess again, no, go ahead, Cheri.
For us, I think it's important to also understand that as a mom, I come with my own personality. It might not be the same as my students. So I might like an orderly household. I don't want a messy kitchen table with art splattered all over the place. That might frustrate me. Maybe that's new, and my student, my kindergartner, is used to being in that environment that has a teacher that loves paper clippings on the floor. And maybe I just don't. So I think we want to make sure that we pay attention to that. And as moms, perhaps we need to set up an environment for our student in a location that we're okay with. Maybe the family room now becomes the new school center, so that my kitchen table can remain clean because I need it to be clean for me, because that's my personality. So I think it's vitally important that parents, we pay attention and we do some self-care as well, and make sure that this new school environment in our home works for us too. For our family, I loved having boxes of books in different locations. And some of those boxes would also have handheld games, something that could be done in 10 minutes. And I like to provide a little bit of structure with my students. Let them know that dinner's going to be at 6, for example. It sets the expectation. They know how much time that they are responsible for managing themselves. Or if there's going to be a snack time in your house, what does that look like? Set those expectations up with your student. Is your student okay being interrupted? Or would they rather finish their project and not have interruptions? So some of that ownership of education and their time and the structure of your home is really going to be dependent on you as a parent and what works for you as well as your student. Jeannie, did you find that as well?
Yeah, and I think for me, there's a difference between the environment and the atmosphere. They're not always cohesive. And so the environment to me is the world is their classroom. So a lot of times my environment changed. We took it outside. We took it to, Ruby's favorite spot is going to a coffee shop and doing her work now as a teenager. So with that, sometimes when you change the environment, the atmosphere changes. I feel like as a parent and her helper, I'm responsible for that atmosphere based on, is it peaceful? Is it calming? How are my responses? We all know as parents, we have no control over some of the things they say and do, right? We wish, right? Perfect world. However, we're responsible for our response to those behaviors. And so even to play off of that a little bit as to what you said, Jill, about like giving the best, our kids give the best out here. And I've come to believe that for me personally, I've seen God change that in my own home where they're learning now to give the best at home so that they can be their very best outside of the home. So this is a great opportunity for siblings to know that this is their built-in friend. Right? They may not like them sometimes and they're super annoying, but you know what? God designed it this way for a reason. And what is he saying to us? And so that's been a huge motto for me in my home is we need to learn to give each other the best, not the leftovers. And even and going into what Cheri was saying about character, academics are absolutely important. We would both agree on that 100%. But the character of our children sometimes it's up there with the academics, and sometimes it supersedes that. Sometimes I have to focus on the character and put a little bit of a halt on the academics, as she said, to deal with those character issues so that the learning is less, so that the atmosphere in that learning is less tension and more calm.
So talk to me about how you would guide character. You know, as parents are approaching distance learning and maybe seeing new things in their student that doesn't come out unless they're in a learning environment, how do you begin to hone and correct and direct character in a kid?
That's a loaded question. I'll just give my little tidbit. It's all good. But I think in going back to like saying how, and it may seem trite, but I've really learned that my only solid resource in that is Jesus. And as a parent, I've learned there's no book with my kid's name in it of how to deal with discipline and behavior. There's good books out there. I'm not saying there isn't. However, you know, Jesus, like God created my kids and he knows how they work. He knows what they need. And so sometimes it's moment by moment, like my kid is freaking out. I don't know what to do, right? I stop, take a breath. All right, God, what do I do in this moment? Because we know it changes, right? Like, I mean, it's like this roller coaster ride and you're like, get me off, like some days, right? But I feel like he can give us what we need in that moment. So, yeah, I think just to give examples, like with my firstborn, she was very high-spirited. And God just kept saying to me, you have to be consistent. Don't give her empty threats. When she has to know that you're in charge, right? Like learning to sort of break that will, but not her spirit. But I remember calling my husband one day and saying, I think I broke her spirit. And he's like, no, you haven't, Jeannie, it's okay. But just feeling it was so much work to just keep at that, right? To just keep at just saying, no, that's not how we behave, or your behavior is not okay. There were times I took her in the car at 3 screaming. And I said, if you can't behave in this environment, we're going home. But that affects me too. I can't visit with my friends. That makes me sad. Like I want, you know, and so my best advice has always been asking God, honestly, like that has been the best tool for me as a parent in guiding their character. And then my oldest two would just really struggle to say, I'm sorry a lot. And I remember God just saying, pray for her heart. Pray for a change of heart, because I would try to manage that. It didn't go well. There was a lot of power struggles, to be honest. It was tough. And as I kind of stepped back and let him take charge, it got a little, you know, a lot easier. And she was great at like positive reinforcement. And no, she wasn't. My oldest didn't like that at all. My youngest, she was like, yeah, bring it, right? Kids are different. We have to understand that too. Their needs are different. You know, I grew up in a home where discipline was just across the board. Well, you have 6 kids. We're all very different. And so, again, leaning into what Jesus is saying about this one, and what do I do in this moment? Take a breath, take a step back. What do I do? We need guidance and wisdom too. So he's my help. I can't say enough about that.
Yeah, it's like building our character too, right?
Absolutely. So when you said that, I'm like, it's not just the kids right now, right? It's us going, what's coming out in me that's not good in my character, and how am I showing up, right? And what does he need to come to me and say, okay, Jeannie, you know, you're not being so patient. Let's look at this. Right? And that's just being honest, because it's hard. Parenting's hard, but it's good.
It's both. Cheri, what do you think? What are some ways that you've seen that grow in your kids, ways that you've guided other families towards healthy relationship and character building?
One of the rules of thumb I like to remind parents of is that our role is really to pass the baton to our students. What we're doing is raising young adults, and we want them to be independent, young, capable adults. Yeah. And so if we can foster that character while they're in our home, when they launch, they're going to feel successful, and we're going to be proud that we have equipped them in that manner. And that really starts, I kind of use this rule of thumb, is when your student stands eye to eye with mother, it's time for you to now go shoulder to shoulder with your student. Prior to this, you were leading. You were determining what time they go to bed and whether or not they have access to their friends and their electronic equipment, and you're sort of parenting through all of those areas of their life. But our real goal is to launch and equip. So that happens when they become as tall as mom and dad. So when your student looks at you, mom, eye to eye, it's now time to stand shoulder to shoulder and do things in camaraderie with our student. And when they are just a little bit taller, when their eyes are above ours, then they slip into the lead and we now are behind. And now we are really that helper, and they're the ones that we want to direct their own activities and be in charge of their own academics. We certainly do that in homeschool. Jeannie mentioned that quite a bit about independent learning with her daughter, I think at 14. Is that right, Jeannie?
Well, it happened sooner than that, but yeah, she's pretty much, I just sort of like watch what she's doing, and she needs some realigning and that kind of thing. Yeah, that's what we do.
Exactly. And that's really a function that happens within homeschool. Is the goal is that we then become guides, because we're not subject matter experts. And so we're really there to facilitate our students' education, especially during those high school years when they need to dive deeper into the subject matter than we are experts at. And so we become facilitators of that education. And so that natural transition happens when our students have to take ownership. And that shows up in character as well. Yeah. So when your students then become taller than you, we want to have successfully passed that baton. So sometimes what that looks like is the simplest routines really need to be looked at from a different aspect of, is that what a young adult would do? Is that what an employer would expect? Are they equipped now to sit in a college classroom? So at 14, it's not okay to still wake your students up. They should have that routine under control, for example. So we want to start looking at the routines, and this is a perfect time to do that because we really can de-stress. Think of the amount of time your student is saving getting to school on time. We no longer have to do that for an hour coming and going. We have saved an enormous amount of time in their day. As Jeannie said, we just don't have to do classroom management anymore. So what used to take an hour for that teacher to direct the activities of 30 students in a classroom is probably half or even a little bit less time. So think of it, for every grade your student is, 20 minutes of solid core academics a day. So for a kindergartner, that is 20 minutes of perhaps, reading or math.
That's right. That's
right.
For
the first grader, it's going to be 20 to 40 minutes. So just simple rule of thumb, you realize how much time you have available to your student in a day to really enjoy who they are. And yes, you might see some character issues that you didn't have to see before, but now we have time to really build out those relationships.
That's so good. You know, one of the questions that somebody sent in was, what do you do if a child is struggling with a concept and you've tried everything that you know to help them? I feel like
I have easiest answer ever. Stop teaching it.
Yep.
We give another opportunity next year or the year after or next month. Just stop teaching it. Remove the frustration. Move on to something else.
I'll give a good example of that. I know as I was bringing Hope home in 4th grade, which is a crazy time of like, it seems like all math skill is like right there for like division, and I'm just like, holy cow, this is nuts. And I remember like just going, we can't, I mean, there were tears involved. I was like, this is craziness. And so we just stopped. And I know, especially with math, they're building blocks. That's really important. You know, the concepts have to come before you move on. And so it was hard for her, but I said, you know what, we're going to take a break from this. She got halfway through that curriculum. She struggled with that because, the book wasn't done, right? And so but the next year she finished that half of a book plus the other book. And so, you know, when we think of it in terms of like, we're the child's first teacher when you think about that. Like, I just want to reassure parents in that, even in this conversation of like distant learning, like, where did they learn to walk and talk and eat in your home as the teacher, right? And so, or the helper, that's a better term. But yeah, with the concepts, I think, and have fun in it. Sometimes I've taken it back and done like theme-based learning, meaning like, if your first grader digs whales, learn everything you want about whales. Incorporate the math, bake a cake that looks like a whale. There's oodles and oodles of opportunities for you to come at it from a different angle. And like Cheri said, for me personally, when they're stuck, I have to take a breath, because I take that personally sometimes too. That's a struggle I've had of like, oh, great, now what do I do? And like, I'm just like reeling back. And then sometimes I just have to stop, take a breath, refocus, and say, it's going to be okay. They're going to get it like it did when they were potty training and eating and so all of these things. And then it would just click, right? It's the same with this. If they're not getting it, they're not getting it. Just stop. Because that atmosphere has just changed from one of being calm to that tenseness. And if you take a step back and just come back to it at a different angle or give it some time, that's, as Cheri said, that's great. Great advice.
Yeah, there's some great research out there too, parents. If you're super concerned about your child's ability to read, your child's ability to function in math, especially in those elementary into middle school age groups.
Oh yeah.
There's crazy brain development happening, brain fold development.
That's right.
Those are averages. They're not true across the board. And so you might have one child at home who's, you know, exceeding maybe an older brother and sister, and that can make you feel a lot of things. But it's a scale. It's a sliding scale. And at the end of the day, I mean, what's more important? That your child feels reassured that they're safe and okay, or that you feel better that they got that problem right?
That's right.
I know that I can struggle with that, maybe not so much in academics, but in kindness, especially in this season of like, sometimes my 3-year-old is better at being kind than my 6-year-old is. And that's very frustrating, but it's a scale and they're learning how to do that. And it takes some time and some patience and some grace. You know, one of the things that I love that you said, Jeannie, and Cheri, you said several times throughout this interview, is allowing your child to own their stuff.
Yep.
So having those clear distinctions of owning what's theirs and what's mine to own.
That's right.
And, you know, we also have a third-party helper here. We've got us who are maybe now moving to more of a helper at home. But we also have the teacher guiding and growing those students still. So I would also just recommend, if you're a distance learner and your child's really struggling, have that conversation with their teacher. Because chances are, you know, both my parents were public educators. I'm trained as a teacher. I know Cheri's husband's a public educator as well. Lots of times teachers know what your child is struggling with, and they've already seen the struggle. So we can work as a team to help make a plan for what will happen with that child moving forward and how you can support their learning. Just before we go, I know we're running out of time. I would just love just to get some advice from both of you. Like, what would you love for parents to know about this time with their children at home?
Go ahead, Cheri. I'll let you start.
You know, one of the, I think the best opportunities that we can do with our children right now to advance their growth is really to recognize that all learning doesn't come from a textbook or a worksheet. And give yourself permission to not be the expert at your students' schoolwork, and give your students a lot of permission to still continue to enjoy life with you at home. And so foster learning in different ways that your student probably can't get if they were in that public school classroom environment, through reading together, through books, through games, help your student identify what their goals might be for the week, and be in unison and togetherness on what those goals might be. For a high school student, that's going to look much different. There's probably going to be a little bit of anxiety toward courses and credits. And we haven't touched a lot on that yet, but recognize that those things are very important to that high school student. But come together as a family during this time. Tap into your public school teacher. Use them as a resource, as you said, Jill. But give yourself permission to recognize that this is a season. And what we want to do is come away from this with our kids saying, you know, we got through that and we really enjoyed our time together as a family. That would be my hope for families.
Definitely. And realizing, just giving each other lots of grace, obviously, and patience, because this is temporary, right? If you're distance learning, this will pass. But maybe the bigger question is, you know, did we survive it or did we thrive in it? And as a family, God designed the family to work really well. And so what aspects of this can we focus on to do it better and to love each other better? Because really that's his heart for us in all of this. And I think this time is a really great time for a reset button to say, where has my life already been so incredibly full that these things are sucking the life out of me, and reprioritizing. Maybe there's some things that have to go. That's okay, you know, and maybe there's other things that we haven't focused on that we need to. And it, you know, not to be overwhelmed by that, but to just, you know, kind of like say, all right, what do you have for us in this? You know, God, what are you up to? Yeah. It's hard, but you know, we're all together. And I think, like I said before, I think there's this chasm of like them and us, even public school and homeschool. There's a them and us thing that can begin to happen. And this is a really cool opportunity to learn from each other, as it should be, you know, like that's the beauty of that. And so just realizing that we're all in this together and it's hard, but we can be there for each other.
I love that. And you know, maybe you're a parent right now in our community, in our context here in Duluth, and you've got a Vineyard kid, you've got a student, you've got somebody who's being raised in school in your household right now. And we just want to offer, you know, we are meeting with families. We are actively calling every single family in our database this week. I just encourage you, as those phone calls come to you, please ask for what you need. We would love to give like opportunities for you to meet with our staff. We'll be doing that sporadically through the week, where you can meet with different pastors and receive prayer and guidance. You know, if you're a parent with a grade school child, I know that Vineyard Kids is offering a Zoom meeting that they'll be doing every Sunday night at 8 p.m., just as a place for parents to come and to pray and to talk about what's hard, talk about what's challenging right now in your context with your family specifically. I just encourage you to, even though that this is a time when we have to be physically isolated, that there are so many social ways for you to connect and be supported. And I would just encourage you to do so. I want to thank Jeannie and Cheri so much for being here with us. I'm going to end us with just a quick prayer. So Jesus, we thank you that even though we don't know what we're doing all the time, and even though we have challenges, and that this period of time is so incredibly difficult, full of anxiety, God, that you meet us anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Would you fill us with your wisdom, with your knowledge, with your presence? And would you help us just connect to resources that can help guide us and guide our families to thrive? Mm-hmm. We love you. Mm-hmm. Amen. Amen. You know, I also wanted to mention, if you are a homeschooling family and you've been able to watch this, Cheri has a wonderful website called creditsforcollege.com, where you can go connect with her more about how to set your child up for a college education future. So Cheri, just thank you so much for coming. And Jeannie, thank you so much for coming as well.
Yeah, thanks for doing this.
Yeah.
Blessings to you, Jill.
Yeah, blessings to you. We'll see you all soon. Goodbye.
All right, bye.